Welcome back. We're with Pastor Matthew Watts, Grace Bible Church in Charleston. And Pastor, let's talk about the struggles of black people in West Virginia. I mean, the biggest problem, it seems to me, is there's such a small number and they're spread out that it's hard to have a voice, it's hard to reach them, but they tend to be disadvantaged economically. And you and I have talked about this even in previous shows. I mean, we talk about trying to educate and we talk about trying to create economic opportunity, but there's also another sort of invisible secret here in West Virginia, is we have a big disproportionate share of black people that are going to prison, and if we could somehow disrupt that trend, we could really reverse things in West Virginia.
The way to disrupt that trend, and you are correct, African Americans make up 3.2% of the state's population, but they comprise 33% of everyone that is incarcerated in the prisons and the regional jail systems. African American youth make up about the same percentage of youth in the state, but they are overrepresented in the juvenile justice system at a factor of 5 over their representation of the population. We have the highest overrepresentation of black youth in the juvenile justice system by percentage in the nation. Okay, and
in the nation,
the United States Justice Department has actually did some work and asking for some information from the Washington Department of Juvenile Justice and Juvenile Services. This overrepresentation, it's called the index. You know, when you look at the percent of youth in the juvenile justice system, divide that by their percent representation in the population, you find that you have an index of 5. That's the highest in the nation. So you're exactly right. Black youth are more likely to be arrested, detained, and incarcerated than a white youth for committing the same offense. And that becomes a part of the pipeline that is filling our prisons.
Is that a result, do you think, of not having the economic structure in their living situations to where they either don't have enough things to do at school, don't have a proper family environment because the father's incarcerated, or I mean, do we
it's really all of the above. You know, it's kind of all of the above. Which came first? Well, one of the reasons is that because blacks live in very concentrated areas, and so more urban, whether it's Charleston, whether it's Huntington, whether it's Beckley, whether it's Wheeling. Therefore, there's more crimes committed in their communities. Therefore, the police have a much stronger presence there. So a black youth, just simply by the odds, is much more likely to be caught doing something illegally than a white youth, just because the police is in this community neighborhood. But then there are factors in terms of the whole education system, all right, in terms of the fact that blacks are not doing well in the classroom. They call it the achievement gap. The lowest performers in the classroom are African American males. It's a major problem. And so if you're not reading by grade 3, then you probably won't learn to read, because they don't teach reading after grade 3. And you learn to read from K to 3, you read to learn the rest of the way. Now you're much more likely to start disconnecting from the educational system. Then where are the economic opportunities? It's probably going to be doing something that's outside of the law. Now you're more likely to get in the juvenile justice system, lead to the criminal justice system.
So what can we do to stop this? I mean, what can we do to
First of all, we got to recognize and admit that it is a problem, and that the victims are not totally responsible. They have some responsibility, but there are some structural problems that cause this matter to be perpetuated. So we got to admit to the problem.
And when you say we have to admit to the problem, is it from the black community or the white community or everybody?
Within the African American community, we are taking ownership. We are not in denial. We know we're in a state of crisis, whether anyone else admits to it or not, you see. When you have 1 in 11 African American people under the auspices of the criminal justice system in some way, that's a major problem, when it's 1 in 100 for the rest of the country. So we know we have a major problem. But I'm talking about our political leaders, our business and economic leaders are in a state of denial. Back in 2004, the Washington legislature passed a document called the Select Committee on Minority Affairs that was prepared by a legislative select committee. And they documented and chronicled all these problems in the African American community, and it came up with 36 recommendations of things that should be considered to try to alleviate some of these problems. Yet they've implemented none of those recommendations, all right? They passed a Senate Bill 573, a minority economic development bill, but they didn't put a single dollar in the fund to fund or finance any economic development. They passed a bill, House Bill 4669, to create professional development schools in these high minority communities and high and low socioeconomic communities, but they made no money available for the community-based organizations to run any type of programs. So there's been some acknowledgement by a couple of our leaders, like Delegate Kerry Webster from Coal County, like Senator Brooks McCabe, Dr. Dan Foster, Corey Palumbo, and others, and John Unger from up in the Eastern Panhandle. But we've got to get the current administration and the legislature to recognize that to invest in the communities with the groups that's working with these youth and their families is an economic development investment.
And do you think this is something that's got to be solved at a federal level, or can it be addressed at a state level?
It has to be addressed at the local level. There needs to be some resource allocation from the federal level. But youth development, family development, community development, economic development, it happens at the grassroots level. Now we're postulating some projects that could be ran in the community. Putting building and construction trades back in the hands of young people, teaching them to build and repair houses to create more safe, affordable housing in poor communities. Weatherization of houses is a way of putting people to work. What is the federal government talking about? It's talking about an economic stimulus package. What's the problem with this economy right now? The problem with the economy is the subprime mortgage loan crisis, the banking crisis, recession, fear of people being unemployed. Where in poor communities, black and white, there's been a need for an economic stimulus package for years, yet none has been forthcoming. So now my hope here now with Barack Obama is that he will come up with a strategy, the way to get some of these monies to local community groups that are committed to youth, family, community, and economic development. If he doesn't do it, Barack Obama could be a one-term president, because the plight of the African American community is severe and has been in a crisis state for some time. This current administration basically has not even mentioned inner city communities or the issues affecting the African American community, and very little was done for the administration before that. There is an expectation in the African American community, not because he's black, but because he had ran on the platform of change and about opportunity for the least
well,
among us.
and the other reason you would be hopeful that he would address these is he was a community organizer. I mean, he should know the plight of, I mean, he should have seen that firsthand when he was working in Chicago.
You are exactly right. This is the first president in my lifetime that really should, and I believe who does understand the plight of urban communities, because none of the other presidents really lived or really worked for any amount of time within the community. But I want to make sure we understand this. In West Virginia, this is not merely about the black. The poor white community is in the same state of economic disarray. High dropout rates, high truancy rates, high out-of-wedlock pregnancy rates, high incarceration rate. Most of the people in prisons are poor whites. 60+%. The blacks are disproportionately represented. But what we're trying to postulate is a model of youth, family, community, and economic development that is transferable and that is replicable in any community where there's high rates of poverty, and we're hopeful that we can get some attention.
Have you had a conversation with the governor about this?
We have, and he is interested, and we are quite encouraged by some of the things that he has said, and the fact that he has some of his people working on a proposal that a group of us have submitted to him for consideration, and we're encouraged by
Are
that.
you hopeful that we might be able to take some steps forward during this legislative session that's coming up to try to address some of these problems?
I'm very hopeful for a number of reasons. Number one, you know, the state is putting together, I think, something like a $2 billion list of possible projects to be funded by the economic stimulus package. There is some neighborhood stabilization funds that are coming to the state of West Virginia from HUD, about $19 million that's supposed to go toward trying to address some of the problems with housing created by the mortgage loan situation. And then there is some attention being given, led by Delegate Kerry Webster and Senator Brooks McCabe and Dr. Dan Foster and the rest of the Kanawha County caucus, to bring some attention back to this Senate Bill 573, which was supposed to result in the Economic Development Authority creating a mechanism to try to stimulate economic development in African American community. So I'm hopeful, and I believe that it's taken some time, but I think that a dire situation like this that we have, where there's an economic crisis that everybody understands and the whole nation is feeling, it makes people more open and receptive when we start talking, well, welcome to the club. Okay, this is what we've been dealing with.
Waiting on you to join us.
Waiting on you to join us, and now we're in this thing together. And maybe we will begin to realize that if we do something at the bottom, there has to be, and this is what Obama has promised to do, that there has to be some economic stimulus at the very bottom of the economy. And let's see if, going both ways, a stimulus from the top and the bottom.
Bubble up instead of trickle
Exactly.
down.
And that's my hope.
Well, Pastor Matthew Watts, we're going to have you back on during the legislative
sir.
season to sort of get a feel of where we're going and maybe get some others on to discuss it with you. But again, thank you for your insights today.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
And that does it for this Internet Extra with Pastor Matthew Watts.